Hey, it's Ari. I cannot believe it's been 3 years since we started the Made in America podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've had the pleasure of interviewing nearly 200 manufacturers and manufacturing supporters, sharing their stories about the great things they do for their companies, their employees, their communities, and our country. I'm so excited as we go into our fourth year to be kicking it off with one of Connecticut's great OEM manufacturers, Sikorsky. Sikorsky is at the forefront of helicopters, digital transformation, and other innovations that are just so exciting for everything we've been talking about on this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and I look forward to continuing it in the months and years to come. Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better. Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. I am really excited for today's guest. We have Mike Ambrose, Vice President of Enterprise Business Transformation at Sikorsky. Mike, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Ari. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, it's the Made in America podcast, so we always start off with the same two questions, Mike. What do you make and why do you make it?
So really easy answer. So we make helicopters for lots of different companies and customers. And, why do we make it? Lots of different missions. We have a mission statement that talks about how we build products and provide services that provide safety and get people home safe every time, everywhere. And that at the core of it is really what we do, is that we're providing that safety, that performance for a lot of different customers.
Getting people home every time, everywhere. It's a good mission.
Yeah.
Easy to remember too. Well, listen, we want to talk about enterprise business transformation and exactly what that means. We want to talk about kind of the future new lift helicopters at Sikorsky, how technology kind of plays into that, your role and all that stuff. But let's start with a little bit of personal history, Mike. How did you get to Sikorsky?
Well, that's a really interesting story. So I'm a local guy. I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And when I was little, my grandfather would take me down to Seaside Park and I would see the helicopters. And I really didn't have any ambition to be an engineer. I was a runner when I was younger. And so in Central High School in Bridgeport, Connecticut, I was state champion in the mile. And my dream was to be a runner. No one in my family had even graduated high school. So I was ahead of everyone else in my family. And a guidance counselor called me in one day and said, Mike, you're getting all these college scholarships. What are you going to do with your life? And I said, well, I'm going to be a runner. And he said, you're not going to make any money from that. What else are you good at? And I said, well, I like to draw. And he said, you won't make any money from that either. What else have you got? And he said, well, I'm pretty good at math. But at the time, that meant I showed up for class.
Right.
And so he said, you're good at math. You like to draw. This was before computers. He said, you're going to be an engineer. And I said, okay, can I still run? Not knowing any idea what an engineer involved. And so for the rest of my senior year, I got in pre-calc classes, and I realized I was in way over my head, and ended up getting tutors and just wonderful teachers and coaches who helped me learn what it would mean to be an engineering student. And so through the University of New Haven, that's where I got my bachelor's, local school. Same thing. They just gave me the tutors and allowed me to not only be a runner in college, but to learn how to be a student. And while I was there, I started interning at Sikorsky. So not really knowing, but what I saw is that I quickly saw that was a company and a mission that was something that really I resonated with. And so it's been an over 38-year career. And I've had a lot of different jobs at Sikorsky. As I've evolved, I started as an engineer. I've been an engineer for the last 12 years now again. And it's just been a wonderful, wonderful career.
Well, that's an incredible story. When you got into calculus and you got over your head, why'd you stick with it instead of say, oh man, this isn't for me?
At first it was because I wanted to prove to myself and prove to others. But the more I got to learn and saw how really the physics of things and how things work, there was just a piece of me that it spurred a creative aspect that you can combine math with design and drawing to really build products that are pretty special. And so maybe it's not for everybody, but for me, I was able to make the connection between the math and the physics and the actual product itself.
And that inspired you to push through, to take the time to get the tutors to ultimately get
and
there.
ultimately, I got a master's degree from MIT.
There you
Yeah.
There you go. So it turns out you not only did you enjoy math, but it turns out you're pretty good at it too, apparently.
Well, yeah, I guess.
Very cool. And I think a lot of people know, we didn't talk about this beforehand, but just in case anyone's listening and doesn't know, can you give a little bit of background about Sikorsky and Igor Sikorsky, who he is, and why, in just a little bit of background?
Sure.
Because I don't know if everyone 100% knows.
So interesting, especially in today's times, is that Igor was born in what is now Ukraine. Not too far from Kiev, and before World War I, he had to leave Russia, and there were a lot of Russian immigrants in the Brooklyn area. And so that's where he settled, with really out a penny to his name. And he had come from a wealthy family, well established within Russia. So shows up in the United States with really just his brain and his personality, and was able to work with other Russian immigrants to start, because at that time, there were no such thing as helicopters. Even though that was his first dream, was to have something that was vertical lift, is that he created some amazing fixed-wing airplanes, seaplanes that at the time were by far the best in the world. But his real dream was always vertical lift. And in the late 1930s, the engines had progressed to the point where it was feasible. And there's a lot that happens in that time. He needed money, ended up getting involved with United Aircraft, which became United Technologies, and they funded a lot of it. But he was 50 years old when he developed the first practical helicopter. Flew right here in Connecticut. And so if you look at that journey, that was a man who had a vision, who had a commitment to the vision, and was smart enough to really just help and develop a technology that really is not intuitive. It's one of those things where helicopters shouldn't be able to fly, quite frankly.
Why is that? Why are, I mean, it's just interesting that why are helicopters so unintuitive, and what is so special about the ability to have that type of vertical lift capability?
Well, this goes back to why is it so special? Igor Sikorsky, a very spiritual man throughout his life, and goes back to our mission statement. He truly believed that helicopters can go places and save lives, that there was no other means to go do it. That's what really drove him, was the mission. And so he knew that for us, and back then, to be able to go places that no other basically vehicle could go, is that it needed to have vertical lift capability. That's why he was so persistent, so committed to that type of transportation. Why is it so hard? It's lots of moving pieces that want to really vibrate. Because your moving pieces result in vibration, result in parts wearing out really fast. And if you've ever heard of natural frequencies and resonance, is that helicopters tend to want to vibrate apart. You have to go and manage so that they don't. And he was able to go figure all that out.
I mean, I'm going to geek out for just a second here, but it seems to me, right? Like if you think about what really a propeller is, or a jet engine, right? It's just blades turning, pushing air, you get lift from a wing. And then it just feels like, well, the helicopter is really just the same kind of concept, just pushing the air down instead of behind. But you're saying there's a lot more to it than that.
There's a lot more physics than there is an airplane. Yeah.
A lot more physics.
A lot more physics. We use high performance computing today to go and simulate those. And now that we're part of Lockheed, Lockheed does the F-35. Right. Pretty sophisticated airplane. Yeah. And so what we have found is that the physics on how a helicopter flies is very sophisticated and very complicated. And so one of the great things about technology today is things like supercomputers, high performance computing, enable us to be able to go and understand those environments. Hence, some of what I'm doing in my job title today.
So I was going to say, you're entreng right into, I think, helping to explain enterprise business transformation. So why don't we hit that topic?
Yeah, great. As I would tell a story is that, so longtime chief engineer at Sikorsky, as we were getting into this really existential campaign to go and replace the Black Hawk, just spent the last 10 years of my career helping develop this technology, and saw really the next step in our revolution is connecting the digital thread. And so last summer, President Sikorsky and I were really strategizing on, well, how do we go do this? We've got this.
Hold on. I got to take a step back, because when you say digital thread, like someone might say change my socks, but I think you maybe need to kind of start off with, okay, good.
I'll get into that. Because it is, the story is, so how to get into this job and everything is, so we said we've got to go and we have to continue the transformation, accelerate the transformation of our company by connecting the digital thread, which ultimately is you have a single source of data and everything gets connected to that data. That's at the 10,000 feet or helicopter talk, 100,000 feet in plane talk. But when we started looking at it, I said, and our president's name is Paul Lemo, real visionary in this regard. He asked me to go take that on. And so I go home and, tell my family, he says, okay, I'm going to leave being, basically probably one of the coolest top 5 business cards in Connecticut is chief engineer of Sikorsky.
Yeah.
Igor Sikorsky had that business card. And so I'm handing in that business card and I'm going to pick up this other one, vice president of enterprise business transformation. So I go home and I tell my mom, my 83-year-old mom, I said, Mom, I got a new job. And she goes, Mike, for the last 10 years, I knew exactly what you did. I said, what are you doing? And she still asks me, 9 months later, what are you doing? And it really is. Now, the title is Enterprise Business Transformation, which is a lot more than just digital transformation, but the foundation is digital transformation. And really what that is, and people often think of that as kind of like, the interface between the design and manufacturing. It is a lot more than that. So when I talk about like these supercomputers and these high performance computing, it starts with understanding how like the helicopter is going to fly even before you build it. There's a whole kinds of aerodynamics and acoustics and vibration characteristics that we need to model at a conceptual level so we know what to design.
Yeah, and let me actually rewind to go forward, because I think I want to connect a couple points here. So, you referenced something that I think everyone in the audience will relate to, which is the Black Hawk helicopter, right?
Right.
Everyone's probably heard about Black Hawk Down. Between the original story and the movie, it's been everywhere. And the Black Hawk's iconic. Every time you see, even on the, there's that, even the shirts with, I forget what the branding is, where they got the guys kind of going down the fast roping.
Right.
That's the Black Hawk on. And that's what they used in the Osama bin Laden raid. People have seen Black Hawks kind of everywhere. But maybe you could explain, we're leaving maybe not leaving, maybe that's actually another point you can make, but what's happening with the Black Hawk, and where's Sikorsky going from a helicopter level that's kind of behind the scenes leveraging this technology? Sure.
So, the Black Hawk, Army first started using it in the late 70s, resulted from really looking at how helicopters were such a vital part of Vietnam, but they needed to increase the capability of those aircraft. So Black Hawk design, early 70s, still very relevant today, 45 years later. So it shows... The design differential was more capacity, more range, more speed? That's right, versus at that time it was the Huey.
Yeah.
So they knew they had to go more distances, carry more troops, more stuff, more payload, and it had to be more survivable. So those were really the characteristics of what resulted in the Black Hawk. And it's proven, as you've seen, extremely effective. It's the most widely sold or operated helicopter in that class in the world.
How many Black Hawks?
Over 4,000.
That's a lot of helicopters.
Yes. And so really, and the Black Hawk is going to continue to be operational probably for the next 50 years.
Really?
Over time, it'll continue to be modernized. We've modernized it over the past 45 years. Re-engined, more lift capability, different blades. And there'll be more of that and more survivability capability being put into the aircraft, just to keep it relevant. So it still has a mission. That basic assault mission still will be applicable. That's not going away. If anything, that helicopter is proven to be more valuable today than even 45 years ago. What is changing is really from a military operational perspective. We call it ConOps, but it's the operations that our military performs continues to evolve. And meaning the needs of the military. So just much like when we had the Huey, that did a lot, but we knew we needed something that you said, larger payload,
but more survivability, better range, better speed capability. And it sounds like what you're saying is we're hitting another inflection point where we have hit where the military is saying, you know, hey, Sikorsky, or hey, community, industry, hey, industry, we need the next iteration. We need more range. We need more payload, more survivability.
More speed. Yeah. And so as they start, and a lot of this stuff happens behind lead-walled, you know, rooms in terms of what those requirements are. But it comes down to that, you know, more payload, more, you know, capability to lift stuff, need to go further and need to be more survivable and need to be able to use speed to get there. So as they looked at all those requirements, you know, that's what resulted in what is going to be the replacement, called replacement for the Black Hawk, but it's the evolution of that mission, of that assault mission. And I
just want to touch on that for a second, because we're now talking about sort of the Defiant X program and what that looks like, which I think is really cool. So better for people to see it. I have no idea. I'm gonna throw a challenge out here to our team, which would be like if we could splice in sort of a video of what it looks like, because I think for people who just know the only helicopters in the past, it's hard to imagine what this helicopter looks like. So I'll ask you to describe it in a second, but it seems, what is the mission capability change that's requiring a rethink of why do we need a revolution in the way the helicopter works as opposed to just more engine on an existing Black Hawk?
Yeah, and some of this we'll get into like the classified realm pretty quickly.
Okay.
But that's why I leave it as, you know, need to fly further, fly faster, lift more stuff.
There you go.
So, yeah. And just
fair enough. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, just leave it.
And so the coolest thing about the new Defiant helicopter is that in many ways it looks like an existing helicopter, but in even more ways, it looks nothing like an existing helicopter. So maybe you could use your artsy words to like to draw. Maybe you could draw with your words.
Yeah, I'm also a poet. So,
the perfect challenge then. Maybe you could explain to folks that are just listening, you know, how is it different? What does this helicopter look like that's so unique?
Yeah. So the basic thing is if you think of a Black Hawk or any helicopter that you see today, it's got a single main rotor. It rotates in one direction, and then most of them have some sort of tail rotor so that the helicopter doesn't spin in circles.
Which I don't know if everyone knew that if you didn't have that tail rotor stabilized, the helicopter would just start spinning,
right?
Probably counterclockwise to the blade.
Well, if you're an American helicopter, yeah. If you're Russian, it goes the other direction.
It goes the other direction.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
We don't want to spin around in a circle in the helicopter, so we need that tail rotor.
Right, you do the counter torque, and so the Defiant X or coaxial technology. What it is that you have two main rotors rotating in different directions. So what that allows you to do is it takes care of that torquing issue, but it also allows you to fly faster. So because what happens is that think of that rotor system is going around in one direction and it goes really, really fast. What limits it at the tips is the speed of sound. So when it approaches the speed of sound, you can think of, you hear it in a plane, this big sonic boom. Well, in a helicopter, what that does is it causes it to stall. And so
not good.
Not good. Yeah, helicopters are like rocks when the blades aren't turning.
Yeah.
So what that does is it actually
helicopters have no glide.
There's
no glide.
Maybe about 10 feet.
Okay.
So that allows it to withhold, to reduce the tendency to stall at speeds. And then what we added was a prop in the back. So because we don't need to have that tail rotor, you can put a prop in the back and that you can either push it or you can use it operationally to slow you down or to point the helicopter. So if you think operationally, that has all kinds of possibilities in terms of how our military particularly could use this kind of capability. And again, probably not for this forum, but you can imagine, if a helicopter, it takes a lot to go turn around. Well, you can pretty much stop on a dime and you can back up, you can point, you can do all kinds of things with that combination of a coaxial main rotor and a prop in the back.
And much more efficiently than you could in the old design?
Much more efficiently.
Because when you think of a helicopter, even, I don't know if the old design is the right terminology, but the historical design, whatever you want to call it, I think you do think of it being able to, I don't know if stop on a dime, but certainly stop. And then once you're sort of hovering, be able to go forward and backward.
But when it stops, because of the main rotor, it'll stop and it'll be at an angle. So it's always like an attitude into the wind, and so with a coaxial prop, you don't have that limitation. Like if you ever see a helicopter land, it's landing like this with the nose up. So you kind of lose your reference. Yeah.
Now that you sort of think about like when you've seen it in movies or whatever, you're right. It always sort of is slight nose up as it comes in.
Yeah.
But with a coaxial, which is the dual rotor, the dual main top rotor, you could be level hovering.
You can be level. You can be pointing up. You can be any direction. And just a funny story to say, like, people aren't familiar with this, is that one of the things we did with this Defiant X a couple months ago is that we flew it from West Palm Beach in Florida to Nashville, Tennessee, 700 miles. So you can imagine for your whole life, you know what a helicopter looks like. We didn't get reports from this, but I could just imagine people like looking up in Georgia, in Tennessee and Florida, and looking up saying, what in the world is that? Is that a UFO or what is that?
Yeah, and it's got a very, very sleek outer design too. So it's,
And it tends to be quieter also.
Is that right?
Yeah.
It also has something else that you don't see you do see it on some helicopters, but not on most, which is the retractable landing gear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Most
for speed. Yeah. If you want to go fast.
That helps reduce the drag. But that's another thing, right? Normally you see helicopters, you normally think of the side skids being out there.
Right.
So that's pretty cool. So this helicopter, not only is it sort of totally revolutionary in terms of different rotor system and whatnot. What did it take? Why now? What did something have to happen? You mentioned sort of Igor Sikorsky had to wait from his original playing with the helicopters in the early 1900s. He had to wait 30 years, not just because of his lack of creativity,
engines,
but the technology didn't exist to make it. Yeah. Did we run into a similar problem with this helicopter?
We did. Great question. Because this particular technology has been around for many decades.
Which type of
the coaxial technology?
Okay.
We have, and in fact, the Russians have a variant of this that's been flying for a long time.
So dual rotors is not new.
Is not new.
Okay.
What's new is the fact that the rotors are rigid. So you can bring them a lot closer. If you see that the Russian version of this, the rotors are much further apart because they're conventional, rotor blades. The X2 that Sikorsky has is because the rotor blades themselves are rigid, is that you can bring them a lot closer together, so that reduces vibration. It allows you to have a lot less drag, and it allows you to have a lot more maneuverability. And so you can do things with that kind of configuration that you really can't do with a helicopter.
So I don't think everyone knows that helicopter blades aren't rigid, Mike. They're not. Yeah. So they're like floppy, like dog's ears.
Actually,
a little bit?
That's a good analogy.
Okay.
Yeah, they actually are. Yeah, and that's part of the beauty of them. That's how a conventional helicopter works. So what's different today is that when you have those rigid rotors, it takes advanced flight control. It takes advanced computers to be able to go manage that interaction. You need advanced tech. So it's fly-by-wire. So fly-by-wire didn't exist 60, 70 years ago.
Right.
And there's advanced control laws that in many respects are only 15, 20 years old at the top. And then there's vibration control, because in that kind of environment, there's increased vibration. Going back, the last time Sikorsky had tried this was back in the 70s and 80s. And ultimately, we had to abandon it because we couldn't control the vibration.
So let's just peel that back a little bit. So you talked about vibration before. So let's try and understand what that means. So when the thing's spinning, it's causing the helicopter to vibrate. What is the
and this is a geek. This is so.
Yeah,
so
I'm with you, dude. That's right. This is my show. We can geek. That's fine.
Okay, yeah, because and there's many different types of vibration. There's vibration related to the number of blades you have. There's an interaction between the blades and the fuselage. There's vibration within the gearbox because you have so many moving pieces. But ultimately, the one that it's the number of blades and the interaction between the blades and the fuselage is the thing that really causes the biggest problem.
Is it just what's causing it? Is it the downward pressure of like the air that the blades? Because it just seems that the gearbox is just turning something.
Yeah, and there's frequency. So everything has a frequency, a natural frequency.
Okay.
And so this is again goes to some of the modern tools we have, is that everything has a natural frequency. And so anything that especially vibrates. And so what we do is we design it so that we minimize that natural frequency interaction between the rotor blades turning and the fuselage. Now that's getting into real territory, but
that's all right.
Yeah.
And so, something that you told me when we were preparing for this show was that it's not just the technology of the helicopter itself that enabled us to be able to get, well, us, I don't work at Sikorsky. Here I go, I'm on Team Sikorsky, but to help Sikorsky get where we are. But one of the things you said to me, which I think is really interesting and maybe ties back to the business transformation, is it took non-helicopter technology to be able to build the helicopter technology. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, thank you. And so, just it starts with like to build the helicopter, but even to design it and to understand it. And so when we talk about, so what is different today is that our ability to model how this advanced system works, and we've been able to do it with a really high level of accuracy that was unheard of, even maybe 10 years, 15 years ago. And we do it with very little actual flight test data. So, if you go back to Igor Sikorsky, obviously everything was trial and error and intuition. And so, you didn't have computers, you didn't have anything to really base it on. And so we're very fortunate that we have all that legacy data. And as we start to extrapolate and start to go to two rotors, we start to go to speeds that go beyond conventional helicopter speeds, we're able to go and really maximize the data we have and run through simulations, ultimately using like artificial intelligence, machine learning, to really predict how this revolutionary technology works. And what we've been able to demonstrate over the last couple of years is that we were really good at it, and so to the point where, we're flying the aircraft from West Palm Beach to Nashville, Tennessee with a high level of confidence. We're able to fly, basically a helicopter almost 250 knots. And so these are, really validation of the tools and the processes that we had developed using, computer simulations, being, enabled by things like high-speed computing, supercomputers, to be able to really model and correlate what we saw in flight tests, to be able to ensure that the blade design and the shape of the blades and the way we tuned out the airframe would provide us and the customer with the best vehicle possible.
So if I can sort of put it into, I think, layman's terms in my own mind, which basically is instead of having to build something, fly it to figure out what's going to happen, you guys are able to leverage technology, computing technology, to essentially program in all the data characteristics that you need to simulate digitally flying, put the helicopter parameters in there, and the computer would tell you this would work, this wouldn't work, this would be too much vibration if you tweak this or tweak that, change this material or that material, change the angles of the blades, whatever it is. You were able to do all of that, not only, I would imagine, a lot safer than actually bringing helicopters, but I would imagine a lot less expensively and a lot faster. Like the ability to iterate without actually having to build it must be amazing.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Because because now you start to bring in things like the build of the aircraft. Is that what we were able to do is that why we were understanding. So like, what is the right blade? What is the optimum blade shape? Is that there's so many variables that go into that, is that we're able to go and quickly evaluate where in the past, it might take us like 4 to 6 months to like just figure out, okay, what is the right shape blade? Then we have to go figure out, well, can we build it? And then can we sustain it? And so you can see like that's going to take, well more than 6 months. We were able to go lock in, and this is, information that we've shared. We were able to go take that from like 4 to 6 months down to like less than 6 weeks.
Really?
And the beautiful thing is because we talk about this digital thread where single source of data, everything's connected. So we're simulating how the aircraft's going to perform. At the same time, we've got manufacturing engineers who are looking at it and says, okay, great blade shape, but I can't build that. Can you go and tweak this twist, or so at least I can build it for you? And all that's happening together. It's happening in parallel. And so as you go through those iterations, we're simulating how we're going to go and fabricate and build it, and we're doing, how we're going to heat it up, in ovens, and all that's happening at the same time virtually. We also, once we get that done, is that now we can go and build the tool that you're going to make that on. We can 3D print it. And so life isn't perfect, so all that sounds really cool.
I was going to say.
But so you're always going to learn something. And so by having this digital thread, by having all the sources and being able to do things like 3D print tools, is that because we're learning organisms, we're always trying to get better. We would find things, well, that's not quite what it needs to be in terms of the way the part was built. We need to go change a part of that the way it drops off, or the way it changes its taper. Mm-hmm. In the past, you would be looking at like 3 to 6 months. to go and make that kind of change. And we said, oh yeah. Give us like a couple weeks and we're just going to go and additive manufacture, modify this tool, and you'll have it in 3 weeks. And we're always trying to do better. So that's just another example of how, we have the ability to go simulate how the aircraft's going to perform virtually. You can virtually go and build it, design it. To now, life's not perfect. How do we go and optimize it?
So a quick question, and I want to ask you about some supply chain stuff because I'm sure there'll be supply chain folks listening to this show. One of the things that I hear about when we get so digital designed is that digitally you can design things that could be either near impossible, extremely difficult, or way too expensive to actually make. So is there anything that you guys have been doing when you think about doing the digital work that you're making sure you don't digitally design something that's just not practical in the real world?
Yeah, that's a big part of what we do is that so much, and a big reason why I took on this assignment, because it wasn't just about the technology. We need to do it at an affordable price, and we need to do it much faster. And so when you're doing these scenarios, I use the example of how do you do a blade a lot faster, is that there's always a cost element to everything we do. There's also a supply base implication to everything we do. And so one of the things that we're always looking at as we go and connect the digital thread, as we look to see how do we integrate processes, we also look how do we integrate suppliers into that. And so by doing that, we're able to understand, okay, what are the processes that we need the supply base to focus on to be able to optimize our designs.
So what is it? So elaborate on that. What do you mean? So because you went right to the supply base where I was going anyway. So.
Yeah. So say in the case of for us, like gearboxes. So gearboxes have lots of, high precision parts, incredibly tight tolerances. We're talking like, in the millionths of an inch, because they have to be that reliable and they have the performance is so critical. Is that we need to make sure that when we design those, that suppliers understand the materials, the tolerances, the processes, on how that all comes together to be able to make parts that are going to meet our future requirements. So as these capabilities increase, as requirements continue to evolve, it puts a lot more technology all the way down to our supply base. And so we need to make sure is that as we go and evaluate this, is that our supply base is growing with us. And so from a digital standpoint, one is that we're communicating to them the things that are important to us. The things that we're going to have to be able to go and simulate an aircraft. Now, not every supplier is the same. Some suppliers can keep on going what they're doing and they'll be fine for the next 100 years. Other suppliers is like, boy, you need to evolve with us because what you do is flight critical, performance sensitive. And so in those cases, what we're doing is that we're making sure they understand, like I said, the materials, the processes, the tolerances, but also the data that we need to be able to go simulate it. And this is where that digital thread becomes so essential because whereas before it was like a supplier would say, data? I've got a drawing, or maybe I won't even give you that drawing because that's proprietary to me.
Right. But
now what we're saying is, no, you need to understand is that for us to be able to do our job, we really do need to have, you can go and keep your secret sauce, but we need to have data to be able to go and do the things we need to do up front. And eventually, we're going to need it to go and sustain the aircraft through digital twins, another term that you've probably heard that is evolving in a critical aspect to the digital.
The digital twin being there'll be a complete digital simulation, simulation's not the right word, but a digital replica of every live device. So the whole history of maintenance, construction of every individual helicopter will also have a twin online that will be tracked uniquely. Yeah.
Perfect.
I may have heard of this once or twice.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. If I'm a supplier, what should I be thinking about that I need to do from my IT, from a digital thread, right? Because I think suppliers have been used to newer toolings, newer supplies, newer materials. That's I think been a thing suppliers are been used to, but this digital thread integration, I don't know, if we're getting into sort of model-based definition, but the idea that I have to give you a digital representation of each part that I make, not just the generic one, but maybe each individual one, so that I know that this serial numbered piece ends up on this helicopter, so the digital twin. It's like, what should I be thinking as a supplier to get ready for that?
Yeah, and you mentioned model-based definition. It does start with that, is that what's the environment, the digital environment that if I'm a supplier that my customers, ultimately are going to need from me. Like I said, not every supplier is equal. So you need to understand, so my product, how will it interface with a digital twin, for example? Or what information will my customers require from me so that they can go and complete it? I was just at CCAT this morning.
Yep.
So Ron Angelo and his team and Paul Lavoie from state of Connecticut, Chief Manufacturing Officer, was there. Great allies. So anyone in Connecticut, you should be leveraging things like CCAT and Paul Lavoie, because those are enablers to help you understand. I mean, a lot of my discussion this morning was, if I'm a supplier, I don't even know what question to ask.
That's exactly, and I honestly, Mike, that's, I think, the key. And I'd love to help, on the in this part of the show here, help people understand where I don't even know what I don't know. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. And so I am finding that is because, hey, I'm a supplier. I've done really well working with Connecticut OEMs, the Pratts, Sikorskys, electric boats of the world, and I'm going to keep doing this for the next 60 years. The answer is, well, good luck, because more and more, we're going to need to understand how you can interface from a digital standpoint, because our customers are requiring it, because the technologies, the capabilities are becoming that demanding that we have to all be on this journey. So I would say, leverage, give Ron Angelo, give Paul Lavoie a call, because that's their goal. I mean, they've got the funds from the government, they've got the funds from the state to be able to connect the dots. And their role in life is to be able to go and explain to suppliers, here's what you need to do, with a lot more patience, maybe than an OEM would.
And some specificity, possibly. And by the way, they even have some dollars for you too, which doesn't hurt.
They do. They have dollars, which is critical. And so that's one of the things that leverage things like that. Of course, Sikorsky, we are absolutely working with especially our critical suppliers that we know have to be the first on the journey, because we need them to help us creating what we call these physics-based model, to help the model-based definition, to help our simulations so we understand how the aircraft can perform, parts that we know are going to be, life limited, susceptible to this vibration characteristics, which results in lower fatigue lives. Absolutely, these kind of suppliers need to be on the journey with us. So we are spending extra time with them. Those are the suppliers who also are more sophisticated and typically, kind of already on the journey. So we're just saying, got to go faster. But there is a lot of the supply base that are still trying to understand, what does this mean? And I will say, for all the suppliers in Connecticut, is that this is a competitive advantage. If you're able to go and understand the value you can provide to your customers, and how you can evolve and take the time to say, well, how do I make money on this? And how do I go and put it in the data in a way that they can understand it? It is a competitive advantage.
So I don't know if this is a question you can answer, but I'll throw it at you anyway. It seems to me intuitively true that when you're building a device as complicated as a helicopter that has cost tens of millions of dollars, that it just seems intuitive that there's going to be value add in sort of digital twinning, in terms of being able to do all this really Industry 4.0 type stuff. Right. And I know you don't have maybe a lot of experience in this area, but I'm curious if you put yourself in the position of a CEO of a smaller supplier. Maybe you've got 50 employees, 100 employees, and you're just making certain parts. Do you think that outside, that there's advantages to figuring out how to embrace this technology in that scale? There is,
yeah. So Industry 4.0 in terms of how do I make parts more cheaper, faster, all more capable. Is that absolutely, because for the same reasons I gave the example of we're making blades now, we tend to do blades ourselves, but you can scale that to just about any size. And the good thing about helicopters is that good thing from a supply-based standpoint, there's a lot of sophisticated parts, and there's a lot of parts that require a lot of very sophisticated processes. And so the more you understand and can integrate in Industry 4.0 digital tools, model-based definition, you're able to do the learning faster. You can do the iterations faster. You understand part variances better, so you can have better quality. And then when you do, because life's not perfect, when you do have variances or you do have escapes, is you're able to get to root cause corrective action way quicker. And then from that, you're able to go implement fixes a lot better, especially as you start to move into capabilities like additive manufacturing. The speed at which you can evolve and iterate with additive manufacturing is significantly faster than conventional like forgings, hog out type machining.
Is there more sophisticated, more parts on the newer helicopters than on the older helicopters?
Well, less. Yes. So, this is, again, I apologize for the geeking out part, but so that flapping blade that we talked about, there is a lot of parts.
Is it?
There's a lot. Surprise! There's a lot of parts because the blade is doing all kinds of flapping, twisting, and there needs to be things that help manage that. And so when you have a rigid rotor, is like, well, all that is designed into the rotor blade itself. So all those parts go away. When you go to modern when you go to modern airframes, they're composites. So, I mean, literally, we have seen through model-based definition, through composites, through additive manufacturing, wherever we apply these technologies, the part count goes down by like 75%. The fastener count goes down by 80%. And so and that technology is here today. So that's happening today on parts. And, you talk about the Blackhawk's been around for, 50, 40, almost 50 years. We have obviously redesigned parts of Blackhawk to take advantage of some of those technologies.
So you think some of the new tech design and advances are going to actually go back and help the Blackhawk?
They are today. Oh yeah, so things like composites, absolutely. Things like how do you use digital design, model-based definition to be able to go and reduce fastener count, even though that is still metal. There's a lot that you can do with metals and a lot you can do for fastener reduction by doing these type of digital integration.
As you've been moving through the business transformation, I know Lockheed's invested a ton of money into the facility, here in Connecticut, and you guys have rightly been very public and very proud, and so am I, that you guys are doing that's good stuff. How does this transformation also change how you think about your workforce?
Oh, very good. And just to say, Lockheed has been amazing in terms of just being the right fit for Sikorsky. And you're right, incredible investments, not only from a facility standpoint, but also from like a research and development standpoint. So it has
$1 billion.
Yeah.
That's a big number.
Yeah. When you combine it all, it's a lot. But it shows their commitment in the vision they have for Sikorsky aircraft as part of Lockheed. And even in the digital twin perspective or the digital integration perspective, Lockheed has been an amazing partner with us on this journey. So as far as the workforce goes, because it's fascinating. Watching, again, I've been at Sikorsky my whole career, over 38 years, is just to watch the evolution and how our workforce has embraced digital transformation and digital integration. Is that you would think this like, at first, especially for our workforce who assembles and makes all the parts, you would say, well, does that mean there's going to be less workers? It has been like 180 degrees different. And I could say this in just watching how they've embraced it, because one, it allows them to do their job easier, better quality, less mistakes. They understand. So like things like visual work instructions and interactive work instructions and being able to automate processes that in the past either would result in ergonomic issues or potentially result in quality concerns. The workforce is like, wow, and in fact, a lot of times our workforce comes to our engineers and say, this is what I need. And not only like, can you go and invent something for us, let's invent it together.
Wow.
It is truly, and you saw, that sounds a little Pollyanna. Believe me, I mean, that is, you can go and you could see it in their eyes in terms of you get someone in the workforce, and we have a lot of very important customers, as you can imagine, walk our factories. And we just like, go at it, go talk to our workforce, and we'll just, us in the ties and the jackets, we'll back away, you go talk to them and let them tell you about this story.
That's cool.
It's been part of the inspiration. It's also been why we've been able to go so fast. The collaboration with our workforce on how we're able to go figure out these things together. Because this is an example of, I like to think engineers are pretty smart. We have some really smart mechanics who are there every day putting these things together, and they provide that feedback to our manufacturing engineers on how we can do it even better.
Did you do anything specifically to win hearts and minds to kind of make that collaboration happen?
Sikorsky, when we were part of United Technologies, had a continuous improvement culture. So that is part of what I would call our DNA. And what we've been able to do is continue to expand upon that. And that continuous improvement culture was where we would always work with our workforce on, hey, something's not quite working right. Let's work together. And so that foundation was there. When it came to like revolutionary technologies, it just put it on steroids. And so in terms of we need, the key thing was the transparency of what the new technologies are. And additive manufacturing was a perfect example, because you can think it's like, holy cow, it's like, well, they're not going to need all these machines, these lathes and these 5-axis machines. Like, does this all go away and somebody just pushes a button? And is that? But there's an aspect of this that says, well, this is how these parts need to go together. We still need mechanics to go and help us, with those machines, and it just. The job becomes a lot more interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say,
it
seems like it's given you kind of some. You seem really passionate about it and like invigorated.
That part, yes, and that part especially, because we recognize is that, it means that the workforce evolves. So when we work with tech schools in Connecticut, it does require more like computer or being comfortable with computers, being comfortable with computer graphics on how it gets displayed and interacting, and eventually Google glasses in terms of being able to go and use those kind of virtual reality. You think of virtual reality and you see people playing tennis and things like that. That stuff's happening in the factory today. So you need a workforce that, when we say virtual reality, they understand how to go in and work with the aids to be able to say, okay, well, this is how this part's going to go together, and don't put that support there, put it over here, because ergonomically this is how I need to go and access it. And they're doing this in a virtual reality room.
That's pretty cool. Listen, for all the parents that are at home wondering, my God, these kids can ever get off the Oculus Rift? What are these video games? Maybe it's actually getting them set up for a career at Sikorsky.
We'll have a job for them.
That's awesome. Yeah. Mike, it's been awesome hearing what you guys are up to. I know I speak for the manufacturing community in Connecticut that we're really proud to have Sikorsky as part of our community, and really wish you guys the best of success as things move forward. We look to partner with you.
Excellent. Yeah, we like being part of all this too.
Well, listen, we're going to switch to rapid fire round of questions to wrap it up. Are you ready?
Yeah, let me take a drink of water.
Go ahead, get it. I'll take one too. Why not? Red Sox or Yankees?
Oh, Yankees. Oh. Yeah. We're from that part of the state.
I know, Mike. That's tough for me to bring you guys up here.
Actually, a long time when Horace Clark and G. Michael were the
big guys.
Yeah.
Oh man, you were a runner. I was hoping you'd be like no baseball or just maybe Red Sox. But anyhow, Starbucks or Dunkin'?
Starbucks.
Staycation or exotic destination?
Interesting. It depends.
Okay.
It depends. On? Just how busy I've been. Sometimes I just need to just chill out and, like my wife and I like the garden, so we like that part. And one of the blessings of being part of Sikorsky, I have traveled the world and I love experiencing different cultures.
There you go.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to Poland. I've spent a lot of time in Poland. Learn how to speak the language and really, I just love history.
That's very cool. Yeah. Sports car or SUV?
I have an Audi. My wife always wants us to get an SUV.
An SUV, but not in your cards?
Not in the
iPhone
cards.
Or Android?
I have an iPhone for work and an Android for my personal.
For personal, I would have guessed that. Do you have a favorite business book?
Actually, I don't.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, if you had to do something other than be the vice president of business transformation or enterprise business transformation at Sikorsky, and it could be anything in the whole world, what would you do?
I mentioned I also am a published poet. So I do firmly believe that you need to have balance in life. And it wasn't something I picked. I grew up in Bridgeport. If you had told me 50 years ago that would be a place like, you're nuts. But it is something that as I've gotten older, I really appreciate the fact that having balance in life is important. So I like to write, and I don't read business books. I read
poetry. That's cool,
yeah.
Man. What's something, Mike, that you learned early in your life or earlier in your career that you think's helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
Work hard, and when you fall down, get back up.
Work hard and don't give up. I like that. And get back up. What's something that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you went back and told young Mike, and if he'd listened to you, you think it'd have a real positive impact on him?
Don't be afraid to take challenges. Yeah.
Don't be afraid to take on new challenges. Give us an example of some time you felt you did that.
In my career is that I said I had many careers at Sikorsky. I was a working engineer until I was in my mid-30s. And I had a boss who came to me, basically said, Ambrose, you have no idea how good you can be. I'm going to go kick you out of engineering. I'm going to make sure you're in a different group. And it put my career on a whole different trajectory. I ended up going to MIT, Sikorsky sent me to MIT for a couple of years after that. And if I was willing to take chances earlier, who knows? I still have a really cool career, but it could have been maybe even cooler. Yeah.
Dude, that is fantastic, Mike. That's a great lesson. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you again for everything you're doing and for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Ari. Great to be here.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by CompassMSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.